Joining us now for our weekly partnership segment, we have David Sirota. He is founder of The Lever. Great to see you, David.
Good to see you.
All right, go ahead and throw this glorious tear sheet up on the screen here, friends. Your latest reporting. Dem voters flip off party leaders and their big donors. Pennsylvania and Oregon election results show voters rejecting the demands of oligarchs and Democratic elites. Go ahead and break it down for us, David.
Well, I was completely surprised, frankly. Call me cynical, call me, old, and my memory is too long of big money always buying elections. But I was pretty surprised that any of the progressive candidates managed to compete in these primaries in Pennsylvania and in Oregon, where lots and lots of oligarch money flooded into these races to try to buy these elections. What you had happen was a set of super PACs funded by really oligarchs in the classic sense. One an oil billionaire, another a crypto billionaire. And this money flowed into these races to try to back the corporate candidate against the progressive candidates. And in most of the situations in Pennsylvania and in Oregon, it looks like the progressive candidate ended up winning. In Pennsylvania, you had John Fetterman, the lieutenant governor, who ran against an establishment-backed candidate, Connor Lamb, a congressman, who had a super PAC linked to the health insurance industry, boosting his candidacy. Fetterman won handily the Senate nomination there. In the Pittsburgh area congressional race, Summer Lee, the state representative, was way out ahead in that race for a while until APAC money came in. Lots and lots of APAC money came in for her opponent. Her opponent, a corporate lawyer who had run his law firm's union avoidance office. She ended up, looks like she's going to end up nonetheless winning despite all of that money. Then out in Oregon, you had two congressional races. One very interesting, Kurt Schrader, the incumbent Democrat who cast that key vote to kill Democrats' long-promised drug pricing bill. He also helped Republicans effectively kill the Build Back Better bill. He was nonetheless rewarded with an endorsement by Joe Biden. A pharma front group came in to try to help him win his election, and it looks like he has lost to the progressive candidate in that race, although the results have not been fully determined. And then in the other congressional district there, you had a crypto billionaire spend about his super PAC spent about $8 million or $9 million to boost a completely unknown candidate in that race against a longstanding progressive state legislator, Andrea Salinas. And despite all of that money, it looks like Salinas has won that race. So this is a good sign that progressive candidates can actually compete when well organized and when they run good campaigns, that they can actually compete against this money. I think the big money forces in this race, and it should be underscored, along with the Democratic leadership. I don't see a divide between the super PAC money and the Democratic leadership. The Democratic leadership saw a moment to try to crush progressive candidates for the long haul, to send a message to all the incumbent Democrats across the country that if you run as a progressive, we will come in and crush you. And they tried to deliver that death blow. And instead, what comes out of this race is a pushback, a message that the leadership, despite having all of that money, doesn't necessarily get to buy local elections, at least not in the way that it's used to buying them, just consistently just getting its way.
Yeah, I mean, there was so much that was interesting about this. Basically, they tried to do to all these progressives what they did to Nina Turner. It was the very same playbook. It was some of the very same players, in fact. And with Summer Lee in particular, I mean, the messaging was even the same. So the money came from AIPAC, and of course, their number one issue is the U.S.-Israeli relationship. But the ads they ran had nothing to do with that. Instead, they ran these ads that were like, she's a fake Democrat, which is exactly what they did to Nina Turner. And ultimately, even though it made that race very, very close, and it's definitely going to a recount because that's how narrow the margin is, it looks like enough voters saw through that for Summer to hang on and ultimately win here. And David, it strikes me that in a few of these races, progressives landed on a strategy that actually was very successful and very potent. And I think we have Joe Manchin to thank for it. Because in the Fetterman, Connor Lamb case, you had local sort of party officials telling the New York Times, Conor Lamb just seems like another Joe Manchin to me, as a very negative thing. He was touting his Manchin endorsement that ultimately was poison in a Democratic primary, to the extent that Fetterman won every county. It wasn't close, even though he had very few endorsements. Conor Lamb had all of the mainstream establishment backing, and Fetterman did this literally from a hospital bed, getting a pacemaker inserted. Same thing with Jamie McLeod Skinner. She also routinely called Kurt Schrader the Joe Manchin of the House. So Manchin has provided Dem-based voters with an evil face of corporate centrism that they want nothing to do with.
It's a really good point. And I think you look at the polling that we review in The Lever today, the NBC News poll had this fascinating number that asked Democratic primary voters, what kind of candidates do you want from your party? Do you want candidates who push for really big, bold change, even though it might be harder to pass? Or do you want candidates who are essentially incrementalist, who push smaller things in the idea that those are the only things you can pass? And now 2/3 of those Democratic primary voters say they want the former. They want candidates who are much more bolder, much more combative, pushing for real change. So I think you combine that, and that is a big increase, by the way, from 2020. In 2020, that number was 53%. So so it's moved up 10%. It's at its high. Point being that I think the Democratic base is clearly restive, clearly deeply unhappy with Democratic Party leaders, and I think that both helps the candidates who make their case in primaries against Joe Manchin, but I also think it disempowers the Democratic leadership, whether it's Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi or anyone else. It disempowers their ability to throw the elections. Their endorsements mean a lot less to the average voter, the average Democratic voter, who sees the party as not doing what it promised, who is unsatisfied with the party leadership right now. And I think that bodes very well for progressive candidates. But of course, that money is not going to stop being spent against them. So we are really in the middle of a real battle here. That's what this is. I think the corporate side thought that they were going to end the battle once and for all, come out with a clean sweep, and that would be the end of it. Instead, we are now in the middle of a really pitched battle.
Yeah, and the last thing, David, that was really interesting to me is, I was uncharacteristically elated by these results, which I'm used to losing every time that I have a candidate that I'm actually like, oh, they could be good. So that was surprising. And so I was really shocked when the next morning I saw not one but two analyses from sort of corporate normal media establishment types that were not a good night for progressives. One was Punchbowl, where they just outright said progressives are disappointed. Right, who brought to you by Chevron and Right.
Blackstone. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So they were like, progressives are disappointed. I was like, I'm not disappointed. And then the other one was NBC News that characterized it as a mixed bag. And sure, listen, there were 2 seats in particular in North Carolina. Progressives hoped to win in the primary. They were flooded with the same cash from the same players, and those 2 don't work out. But nobody on the left ever expects to win everything because we know the deck is always stacked against us. Very telling to me in that article is they didn't even mention Fetterman as being on the left side of the party spectrum. So they just discounted, we're not even gonna count that one. We're gonna claim that one because I don't know why. I mean, the guy's Medicare for All sport, he's a Bernie guy. So I wonder, looking at that, it made me wonder whether the establishment even recognizes that they were really kind of dealt a blow or that voters were trying to send them a message with these results.
Oh, I think they know. I definitely think they know. And I think, look, as it relates to Fetterman, I think he did a great job. He's been running for that seat for a long time. He's created a kind of unique persona, political persona. And he managed to deter the kind of money we saw spent against House members. He managed to deter a lot of that money from intervening because he was running such a strong campaign. In fact, there's an interesting dynamic here, which is that last election cycle, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee intervened in a lot of primaries to endorse a lot of different candidates, and most of them were slaughtered in the general election. And so the DSCC actually in this cycle has largely stayed out of trying to pick candidates candidates put the thumb on the scale because I think they learned a lesson. I'm not sure the House leadership is going to learn the same lesson. I think they're more presumptuous than even the Senate Democratic leadership. But I definitely think the establishment knows that it went into those elections thinking that this was going to be the end, that every Democratic candidate across America would know never to run as a progressive candidate because they would get crushed. And I think the message was a pushback that, hey, there is a progressive way to win these races. In fact, the headwinds, the actual headwinds in an even playing field, with the party's base being so angry at the leadership, the headwinds are actually for the progressive candidates. In other words, the fact that the progressive candidates were even close in these races while getting so outspent is a miracle unto itself.
Yeah, and then Fetterman shows you and like how he just destroyed Connor Lamb, who was supposed to be like the next big thing in the party if you asked like corporate Democrat types. That shows you what it actually looks like if you do have the even playing field in terms of the money as well. David, great analysis as always. Thank you so much, and we will see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you guys so much for watching too. We'll have more for you later. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.